Welcome to Petersen's Bowhunting Radio, the official podcast of hardcore bow hunters. From the latest archery equipment and expert shooting advice to proven bow hunting tactics and the sport's biggest personalities, we've got you covered. Now, here's your host, Editor Christian Berg.
All right, welcome back to Petersen's Bowhunting Radio. We are the voice of bow hunting, and as we head into the dog days of summer, we are looking forward to the start of fall hunting seasons, and the very first ones that are going to be coming our way will be in the middle of August, and that's pronghorn season. And I've got a guest with me today who has killed more than his fair share of pronghorns over the years. That's Mr. Eddie Claypool, one of our esteemed field editors and an all-around great guy. Eddie, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You know, Eddie, it's kind of an exciting time of the year because, you know, we're just heading into the 4th of July weekend here as we record this show. And I don't know about you, but for me, 4th of July is a time to start getting serious with my trail cameras and my scouting for whitetail seasons, because by now the bucks, you know, are getting enough growth on their racks that you can pretty well tell if you're going to have a good buck here for the fall. And so there's a lot to do when it comes to scouting, camera work, food plot work here as we head into July, maybe getting some areas prepped for August plantings for your fall plots, and then of course pronghorn season as we mentioned. So it's getting to be that time of the year for those of us who are bow hunters. I think this year more than ever, with this whole coronavirus pandemic and things that we lost in the spring and being on lockdown, like, man, it just feels good to be getting to that time of the year where we've got some things to get out and do and look forward to, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Get out and shoot your bow and go through all your equipment, make your plans and do your applications and get your tags. There's plenty to be doing right now. Get in good physical shape. Yeah, I always love the summer because as a construction worker, it was a hard time of year for me, and I was always counting the days down. I would mark me a little calendar on the wall at work and start checking them off toward August.
It's hard to believe that you talk about getting in shape. I would think that laying in a ditch, welding pipes in 105-degree heat with the sun beating down on you would sweat any ounce of fat off that you had. You look like you could go run a marathon right now, my friend.
You know, it's really weird because I started the work that I was doing for 40 years right out of high school, 4 days, and I was doing it. So I never had a chance to know anything different, and I didn't realize all my life that I was actually in good mental and physical shape, you know, fairly tough from my work. I would go out west and be able to tackle the most brutal stuff right off the bat, and I did it for 40 years, and then the last 5 or 8, I have been kind of couch potatoing and, you know, kind of goofing around and not working, and now I found out what everybody else had to put up with, and that is, you know, you do have to get in shape, because if I went out there the way I am right now, I would be in a bind.
Well, I like the fact that you've slowed down just a little bit, because that means that I've got a fighting chance of keeping up with you now. You know, yeah. About 80% of Claypool is equivalent to like 100% of me. So yeah, we're kind of now getting on the same wavelength. You know, when it comes to Western hunting and being in shape and all that stuff, you know, one nice thing about pronghorn hunting is, for the most part, they live on the prairie and it's pretty flat ground, and you don't have to deal with the hills and the elevation quite as much as you're going to, you know, with elk or mule deer or that sort of thing. So in a lot of ways, it's a perfect sort of first Western hunt in regards of the terrain and the habitat. And then in addition to that, you've got a situation where, okay, pronghorns are plentiful. They inhabit a lot of states throughout the West, and the licenses are relatively easy to get. In fact, even if you want to do an outfitted hunt, pronghorn's really about the last Western hunt that you could do on a guided deal where you're not going to have to break the bank to do it. So, you know, it's kind of a pretty classic entryway for people who haven't hunted the West before to get into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great because people don't have to have a lot of gear. They can kind of live out of a base camp at their truck a lot. The weather's going to be good. It's an excellent starter hunt, and it's a good way to get your feet wet and find out if Western hunting is for you, because a lot of you guys have to come so far to get here. I get to jump off from right here in the middle of the country, so getting to pronghorns or any Western hunting for me is not as big of a deal. But yeah, you need to start off small and try it, because I've seen a lot of guys go out and buy a bunch of gear and make great big plans, and then the next year they're done. They're not doing it. They're selling all their gear. So pronghorn would be a good starter hunt to find out if you really have a passion for the West or not.
Well, the other thing about pronghorns, it's like, man, they're just so cool. Like when you get out west and you start to enter pronghorn country and you see those first pronghorns, and it's so neat because, unlike other game, which is always trying to hide, the pronghorn's whole deal in life is they don't hide at all. They live out in the wide open, and that's their defense mechanism, right? You can see them and they can see you, and they run so fast and they see so well that that's actually their defense mechanism, is to be so visible, but also to be able to see any kind of a threat coming from so far away that they can get out of the area before you can ever get to them. So anyway, point is, as you're just driving on the highways, whether it's an interstate highway or a local, ranch road in the West, it's nothing to have groups of pronghorns, within 100 yards or even closer different times. And they're just such beautiful animals. And when you see them, man, especially when you see a nice buck, it's like, man, I want one of those. Any bow hunter is going to look at that animal and think, yeah, that is definitely something that I want to hunt.
Yeah, they definitely take the cake on being the most scenic animal. Their colorations and their everything about them, and the environment they live in. A lot of people don't like desolation and quiet, wide open spaces, but I do. I thrive on them. I mean, I love to get out there in the solitude where they live and just take it easy, set up a base camp under a good shade tree somewhere, and just spend the mornings and evenings out. You can go for a week or two at a time and sometimes not hardly ever see people, and it's a good relaxing outing. And I think everybody that can get to them ought to give them a try. And some of it'll stick with some people and other people won't be too interested, but it's like we said, it's a good way to get started early. August the 15th, you can't beat that.
No, you can't. And you talk about the solitude and the desolation, and that's a big part of the experience too. It's funny because that last year I happened to hunt antelope in eastern Montana, and I was talking to one of my buddies here in Pennsylvania just the other day, because I'm going back there again this year for an elk hunt. I had hunted elk out there as well, and I was saying that the county where I hunted in Montana, or where I do hunt in Montana, there's about 1,000 people in that county, and there's a small town there. There's 300 people in the town, and so that only leaves 700 residents for the entire rest of the county, and that county is far bigger than the county that I live in here in Pennsylvania. And here in Pennsylvania, the county that I live in has about 140,000 residents. So you can imagine, and a reason I was talking to him about this is I was trying to get him to understand. We were actually out glassing deer the other night at a couple of farms, his farm and then a neighboring farm where I hunt, and we were up in one of his rifle platforms just with a spotting scope and some binoculars, and we were just watching the deer as they came out in the evening for the feed. And so I was explaining to him the difference between hunting in Pennsylvania and hunting in Montana, and I'm like, can you imagine, I was like, you'd have a hard time finding somebody. You get out there on the prairie in an antelope blind or something, and like, man, if you need help, good luck, because your best bet is to get to the highway and just wait for a vehicle to come by, because otherwise I don't know how you're going to find anybody.
Yeah, a lot of people are intimidated by that. I thrive on it. I love it, and I strive for it, but it can be intimidating. You better sure enough be totally self-sufficient when you come to the wide open spaces to hunt pronghorn. You're not going to run to town very often, and and you better have all your, food and water, and your it's probably a good idea to have one of those devices where you can emergency, notify somebody if something bad happens. Because the one thing you do have to watch for is the rattlesnakes. There is definitely a rattlesnake situation to be had. Yeah.
Yeah, we found one last year on our hunt, which was kind of neat. He was actually sunning himself right on a gravel road, so that wasn't so scary. We were able to pull the truck over, and we actually hopped out and took some neat pictures of him before we moved on. But yeah, you wouldn't want to come up on one of those suckers, while you're on a stalk or something like that.
Yeah, I've had some run-ins with them, like in the low light of the morning or low light of the evening, when I would be going to or from a blind, and I've actually had them strike at me and hang their fang in my pant leg one time. So, I mean, it can happen. You got to really be careful. I have not been bit by one, but that would not be a pleasant experience.
No, we don't want to focus too much on that. This whole point of this show is to get people excited about pronghorns, and
right.
you're going to scare them off, Eddie. Now you got to watch.
No, I'm not trying to do that. I mean, you can be scared of solitude too, but it's a good thing. I mean, you're more safe out there in the wide open spaces than you are anywhere else, because the number one enemy to the people is other people. So you might as well get out in the middle of nowhere and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, and especially right now, if you're looking to do some social distancing, there's not any better place to do some social distancing than on the prairie,
Right.
Well, look, you and I both came to pronghorn hunting, similarly, because you and I both got, started with whitetails, as most bow hunters did. And, it's funny because we don't live close to one another. I'm up here in the Northeast, and you're down there, in Oklahoma, and different terrains, different type of habitat, but whitetail country nonetheless. And so, you started out chasing deer, I started out chasing deer, and sooner or later, I think most bow hunters, if they're really big into it, they start to look for other types of adventure. And the nice thing about pronghorns is it's still a species that's accessible to the common man. There's a lot of them. There's lots of different states where you can find them. And because of the habitat where they live, there tends to be quite a bit of public land, in pronghorn country. That prairie ground, it's not hard to find big pieces of BLM or state land or other types of government lands where you can get after these pronghorns and do a DIY hunt quite reasonably.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the greatest blessings we have in this country is all our public lands. And whether it be state land, BLM, Bureau of Land Management, or whatever, there's hundreds of thousands of acres in multiple states that you can just pull out onto and have a big time. You don't have to account to much of anybody. There's very few regulations, a lot of the BLM places anymore are kind of knocked out. Back in my day, we would dig pit blinds, but nowadays it's pretty much all pop-up blinds, which is good. It's a lot lower impact. But yeah, you can just, there's the camping restrictions are very minimal. You can just come out west and get you an Onyx chip, and whatever state you're going to, you're good to go. You're ready to tackle more ground than you could look at in a lifetime.
So if somebody's looking to do a pronghorn hunt, how would you recommend that they go about getting started with that, assuming they don't want to go the outfitted route? And before we move on, I will just say that when it comes to outfitted hunts, the pronghorn is really the last affordable outfitted hunt in the West, because if you're looking at a trophy mule deer or a fully guided elk hunt, it's nothing to start maybe at about $6,000 and work up from there, and to get to $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 for a good quality elk hunt, where you can still find fully guided, outfitted pronghorn hunts for under $3,000 across a lot of places in the West, which isn't cheap by any means, but that's pretty accessible for the common man. And if you really have never been to that part of the world before, it's not a bad way to go.
No, not at all. Yeah, really the trophy pronghorns are like everything else. They're a lot of them are mainly on the private ground anymore. The really biggest ones, and if you go guided for them, you can get up in the $3,500 or $4,000 range in like New Mexico and some of the the places where they grow the big ones, but there, I've always laughed. What's the difference between a big pronghorn and an average one? You could say, what, 2 inches, here or there. I mean, I wouldn't worry about trophy things on pronghorns. I'd just go have a good time. It's some of the finest eating meat you'll ever put in your mouth. And if you want to go guided, that's fine. Go to the states where you have a better chance at a really top end, 80-inch or bigger buck. But, a mid-70s buck is a trophy any day, and you can access them in just about any state, period, and do it on your own, for cheap.
Well, the thing I always say, too, when it comes to pronghorns and trophy quality, like, here in Pennsylvania, there are no pronghorns. There's not any pronghorns anywhere close, so most hunters, they don't really know a good pronghorn from an average pronghorn. And so I always say, I can go out to Wyoming or Colorado or wherever and shoot an average pronghorn. I could have that thing mounted, stick it on my wall here, and my buddies from Pennsylvania come over and you can just tell them, hey, that's a big pronghorn, and they won't know any different. They'll be like, wow, you got a pronghorn? I've never even seen one of those things, So yeah, it's not like trying to, show them a little basket rack 6-pointer and tell them you shot the buck of the woods or something like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean, it's excellent for people to get started with, and all they really need to do is just pick out what state. I mean, you can start in the central states like the Dakotas and down through Nebraska and even into Kansas, and there's a lot of people don't know there's tags available there for archers across the counter pretty much. It's not, those states aren't known for trophies, but for a starter pronghorn hunt, you don't have to go way west. You don't have to go to Nevada or Utah or Wyoming. Wyoming is the king of pronghorns, of course, and everybody wants to go there, and rightfully so. But I mean, you go to Wyoming, really, there's two levels of do-it-yourself hunts in Wyoming. There's the ones where you wait for about 6, 7, 8 years to get built up a lot of preference points and get into one of the more premium units that have 90% land and bigger pronghorns. Or you can go to the eastern half of Wyoming, where you can get in with 1 point, maybe 0 points in some units. And if you take your modern technology with you, where you can be looking at the land ownership status, you can do a pronghorn hunt just about almost every year, even in Wyoming, if you're willing to deal with skirting private land and a few more hunters. But the numbers of pronghorns in Wyoming is just as good in the east as it is in the west, But you can step right across the line over into the Dakotas and hunt them too, and it's pretty overlooked.
Yeah, I actually, a couple of years ago, I did a DIY hunt over there in western South Dakota, and there were a lot of antelope over in that part of the world, and those tags were pretty well guaranteed. I think that they were guaranteed, actually. You just had to apply by a deadline. And I think It was sometime in early June, and as long as you submitted your application before the cutoff, you'd get your license in the mail, later in the summer before the season.
Right. Yeah, a lot of times people look at the maps and go, there's not enough public land there, and public land wise, that's pretty true. There's pretty good chunks of it in South Dakota, but you better sure do your research too and look at the walk-in hunting opportunities, because half of some counties are walk-in hunting available. So just because it doesn't show up as public doesn't mean it's not huntable. They have excellent walk-in hunting programs in South Dakota and Nebraska that open up tens of thousands of acres.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something where, you mentioned it earlier in the show. Onyx Hunt is a great app for that. That'll show you not only your public land and private land, but it'll show you walk-in areas as well. And then you can get on the state wildlife department websites and get more detailed information about those individual walk-in areas, because there are different rules in different states. And like I know in Montana, there's like 3 or 4 different classifications of walk-in areas. So some of them you can just go on as you please. Other of them you have to sign in at a little sign-in box at the entrance to the property. And other ones you actually have to call in advance and make reservations reservations for certain dates. So as you're looking at an area, you got to kind of do all that homework ahead of time and have a game plan of, places that you're going to go when you get there, and go look at those properties, and then try and figure out, where you want to set your blinds, or if it's later in the season, try and decoy some bucks or whatnot. So, yeah, talk about maybe just some top states that you'd recommend. You mentioned a couple, but if you had a buddy, if I called you up and I said, Eddie, I've never hunted pronghorns before, I got a couple friends and we'd like to make a road trip and try and do this, well, where would you tell me to go, and when would you tell me to go?
Well, without a doubt, Wyoming is king. I mean, it always has been. They have the largest numbers and the most public land, and so it's choice number one. But there's a lot of other ones like Montana, Idaho, and parts of Colorado are pretty much accessible. A lot of people overlook eastern and southeastern Colorado. A lot of public land there that can be hunted virtually every year. And then Montana, it's a drawing tag, but it's pretty much a high percentage of that you're going to get it, and it has absolutely, unlimited numbers of pronghorn from all the way from the north to the southeast to the west. And Idaho is a sleeper. It's farther and it gets hunted harder, but it has, a number of unlimited type areas in it. And then it has the limited too that you can put in for that have the bigger bucks. Nevada is not the, it's about a once every 10-year hunt. So I don't pay much attention to Nevada. I'll go to it maybe every decade. But, other than that.
One state, Eddie, that never really gets any publicity from us, and it probably should. I don't hunt there. You don't hunt there. That's why. I guess we don't talk about it. But I think they have pronghorns all the way out into California, don't they?
Oh, yeah, they do. It's just a matter of the tags, being very tightly allotted. It's like New Mexico. New Mexico has a ton of antelope, and it has quite a bit of public land to hunt them on, but they're really, really tight on their tag allotment. So, I don't believe that most people that are especially entry level and starting off should look at those states. They might start building points. That's an option. Just build points, and then one day down the line, when you have got yourself into the pronghorn game and become proficient, at doing it yourself, then you'll be set up to go to a state maybe where you have 6 or 8 points to where you might be able to hunt a trophy pronghorn. But the main ones to focus on are, you can go, like we said, to the central part of the country there through Nebraska and South Dakota area and hunt them, and Kansas too. But Wyoming is definitely the place to go. There's a lot of units there that don't fill out their quota on the first choice option every year, so there's leftover tags. And then Montana is a no-brainer. It's almost 100%. If I'm not mistaken, on bow draw, and then Idaho with those unlimited units. But of course, Idaho is going up in their prices this year too. Everywhere does that every few years. It's getting to be, back in my day when I started, you could go on the entire outing and come home for less than what you pay for the tag nowadays. But that's neither here nor there. Progress, they say. So
well, I don't know. I don't know. The tags, I think in both South Dakota and Montana, I've hunted Wyoming, but it's been a few years. But those are the 2 states I've hunted most recently for pronghorns. And I think that those tags, honestly, they were each $200 and some, I think, a piece. Which, for non-resident licenses anymore, that's practically pennies.
It is. Yeah, that's really good. But I can date myself because back in my early days, I used to go to Colorado and stay for 5 weeks at a time and come home. And on that entire outing for fuel out there and back and food and tags and everything, I wouldn't spend $500.
Yeah, but what you're not mentioning is, didn't you used to also drive a Ford Festiva out there, and then you drove that thing up into the backcountry and practically broke an axle getting there, and then you slept in that little compact car and you ate beans and weenies and beans every day, right?
Yeah, that was during the passion days that were kind of unexplainable. now that I've grown out of them and I've become a little bit more golden age, I look back on that and I say, was that really me? I mean, it's hard to believe. It's almost like I've lived two lives. I can't relate to that kind of psychotic behavior, but if you've got it, you've got it bad. So you might as well try it. I mean, come out west and try it. I mean, if I've sent a lot of guys out there that, they see the articles, they see the videos, and they get all excited, but 2 years later, they're out playing golf again. I don't know. Some people that you either will take to it and love it and it will get in your blood, or you will pass on by and go to the next hobby,
Well, I was talking to actually a buddy of mine just last night about this, so I got to get your take on it, Eddie.
Yeah.
Do you prefer Franks and beans, or do you like beans and Franks?
I used to just make up a gigantic pot of stew, freeze about 15, 20 bags of it, put it in my cooler, and I would eat literally stew 7 days a week for 2 or 3 weeks on my trips. I've made Peg so sick of stew she could kill me over stew, but food is food. You just got to eat it to survive. And back in the days when I was that passionate, I didn't care what it was if it kept me plugging along,
So we talked about where to go and gave plenty of states. And again, I would say that between Onyx and the state wildlife websites, that's where you want to focus to get yourself started. Most of those states out west do a better job, frankly, than a lot of our eastern states do in terms of providing information and resources for out-of-state hunters. So you're not only going to be able to learn about licenses and availability and draw, but a lot of these state websites you're going to find like Pronghorn distribution maps. They're actually going to show you the areas of the state where the pronghorn numbers are the highest. Some of them will have annual surveys that they conduct, so you can see like actual pronghorn density in different units. And then of course you're going to have harvest data, so you can see where more pronghorns are being killed. Obviously, if you're looking for a do-it-yourself hunt, you want to look for units with a lot of antelope and a lot of antelope being killed. That means that if other guys are doing it, you've got a decent chance to do it too. And then from there, it's just a matter of working out the logistics of how you're going to get your tag and how you're going to get yourself out there, the equipment that you're going to need, etc., etc. And so some of that now is going to play into the second part of my question. First part, right, was where to go. Second part is when to go. And when it comes to pronghorns, you really kind of have two options, right? Because traditionally, kind of, I would say the stereotypical pronghorn hunt is going to be that opening day or opening week hunt. So in other words, most seasons are opening up right around the 15th of August, and you're going to try to get in country either, the 14th or maybe even the 12th, and give yourself a few days to do some scouting, get some blinds set up, and you're really focusing on that classic water hole type strategy, right, Eddie? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, that is the stereotypical antelope hunt that you just described there. And then the other level is you come back a little later, which can be really more enjoyable because a lot of times it'll cool down a little bit as you get into September there, and most of the people are gone by then. Antelope is hectic early on because there's not any elk.
There's nothing else to hunt. That's right.
Right.
Nothing else to hunt.
Later, it can get really pleasant and really quiet and enjoyable, and the rut starts. I mean, by the middle of September, they're running, amok, chasing each other, and the bucks are crazy aggressive, and the decoying can be really interesting. And if you're not going to set in a water hole, then I would come and do the rut.
So let's come back to that though. Let's assume that a lot of guys are going to come in August though. So if you're going to do it, and I know you've done plenty of it over the years, Eddie. If you're going to do a water hole hunt, talk to me about how you go about that.
Well, the first thing starts with making sure you're in the right habitat for that, because pronghorns from New Mexico to Montana inhabit habitat from probably 3,000 feet in elevation up to 9,000, and you got to get in the right dry, arid, desertish habitat to hunt them on water, and then get on whatever source is your best source, Google Earth, or some states even have websites that on the game and fish area, if you dig deep enough, and you got to really dig, because some of the game and fish websites go deep nowadays and have a lot of information, like you said, but some of them will show you where their guzzlers are, they call them, where they put in the man-made water sources, and they're not going to be visible on Google Earth usually. They're pretty camouflaged, but find your water sources, and if you are coming early to hunt water in mid-August, I always go at least a week early and try to be ready to kill one on opening day, because if you wait to get there on opening day, number one, a lot of the water holes are already going to be taken, and the animals are going to be hammered some off of the water. They're educated a little bit. I like to get there and literally know almost that I'm going to shoot my goat, early on first day. So I would put the largest proportion of my trip before season. Actually, if I was water hole hunting on opening day, I would plan on a week before, and then you should not need really to hunt over a day to 3 max, and you should be done. And if you've got 2 weeks, that's great. Take a week before and a week into season. That's the way I would do it. But I wouldn't get there right on opening day and planning on running out there and staking out a water hole, because a lot of times they get, they're going to have blinds on them. And, common ethics, we're not going to try to double hunt a place. We're going to go find our own, and so you can get behind the 8 ball by getting there on opening day. I would go early, get the lay of the land figured out, and you'll gain a lot of knowledge too on where the groups of antelope like to hang out. And I've actually found little bitty seeps that you can't see on Google Earth, little bitty seeps that might come out of the ground and run 2 or 3 feet, by doing a lot of on-ground scouting. And boy, when you get goosebumps on the back of your neck when you find one of them, because they're the ones that are really worthwhile. Everybody sets the ponds,
Yeah, what talk to me about that. Talk to me about the ponds and then the other spots. How do you kind of get the sense of, as you're scouting on the ground, what to you makes an ideal spot to set up for your blind? Because obviously there's multiple options. There's stock tanks, and there's ponds, and there's little seeps or dry creek beds that might have a couple little puddles in them. You got all these different places where you could potentially set a blind. You're only going to set 2 or 3 up. The average guy isn't going to set more than 2 or 3 blinds. So how do you narrow all that down to 2 or 3 spots?
Well, if you look at, say, maybe you get there early enough to look at 10 or 20 different, potential water sources, everything from stock tanks and windmills. I mean, there's a lot of windmills. I've actually shot an antelope off of the windmills, over tanks, and the dirt tanks, and then the seeps and things. Really, the only way you can decide which is, antelope don't like to come to water where their predators can jump on them at the water. They like a wide open, out in the middle of nowhere water source where it's flat and clear. That's their favorite type of water source. So if you find an old barren dirt tank out in the middle of a square mile flat, you can bet it's going to get pounded. I found some incredible water sources that were down in valleys that were covered with a lot of deep sage and big boulders around, and they were awesome water sources, but the antelope do not like to come to them because there's too many predators can be right on them, So, even though we don't like that barren, wide open, flat country, they do. So I often go and look at the water sources that are, right out in the, where you can't see a tree for 10 miles in any direction or anything, because they're the ones they like to come to the most.
And you look for, what kind of a sign are you looking for? Do you have to see a heavy sign to convince you to set up at a particular spot?
Not really. I will often carry a number of cameras with me in my fanny pack while I'm doing a lot of scouting, and I'll pop them up on these water sources. You can tell immediately when you get to one whether it's good or not, because it'll be pounded with tracks all around the edges and stuff. And, I'll pop the cameras up and leave them about 2 days and then go check them, and you can get a pretty good inventory of what's going on, how often they're coming. But to me, it doesn't mean a lot about numbers anymore. I mean, I enjoy numbers with the best of anybody. I like to sit in a blind where I'm seeing antelope at least maybe 30 minutes all day long. It keeps you interested. There's nothing worse than sitting in a hot antelope blind for 12, 14 hours to see one antelope. I mean, I've done that. I've sat all day long and had heat exhaustion and be throwing up at night and never even see an antelope during that whole set, because the resources have been very, very limited in some places. But those are the kind of places where you're liable to kill a real whopper one too, where there's not very many antelope. It just depends on what your goal is. And if you're starting off, go to the, Wyomings and the Montanas where there's a lot of them, and hunt the main core areas, because you still can get a good hunt in. And you'll see a lot of antelope, be excited all day long. But, I mean, I just go and look at immediately I look at the tracks around the tank. If there's a lot of them coming, I've been there, put my blind up and have them come in and stand and watch me put the blind up. I mean, they're smart, but they're not, their mental capacity is not as high as, education wise, as like our whitetails we hunt, but they live on their eyes. And as long as they can see you, they're not too worried about you. I've had them come and watch me put the blind up, get in it, and an hour later, the same one come in and water right in front of me. They can't see me no more. Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I would say about the early season hunts is the last two DIY pronghorn hunts that I did were both planned to be those early season hunts, but neither one of them worked out how I had hoped. Now, on the first one, I was not successful. Nobody in my group was successful. On the last one last year, both of us were successful, but regardless, they were not waterhole hunts. And so right. I'm gonna put a huge caveat, and I'm gonna say for myself, I will never again attempt a waterhole hunt unless the year has been quite dry, because it's
right.
easy, to sit in December or January or in February and talk to some buddies and say, yeah, we're going to go to Wyoming or Montana or South Dakota, and we're going to be there, on August 12th, and we're going to scout a little bit, get some blinds, and kill these antelope, on the 15th or 16th of August. But then in the intervening 6 months, right, you get a really wet summer. The last couple of summers out in the West have been wet summers. And so you get out there in August and you expect to just see brown, dead grass everywhere. And you get out there and it's lush and it's green and the cattle are fat and happy and the ranchers are thrilled because they've had a tremendous growing season, and the beef is just, doing better than it's ever done. And it's actually great for the antelope and the mule deer and the elk too. But it's not so good for you as a bow hunter, because I've done it now 2 years in a row where I went, you look around at those water holes, to your point, they should be excellent water holes, and the sign is very sparse. You can tell that they're not being hit that heavily because there's water everywhere out there on the prairie. Every little low spot has a little puddle. And those animals just don't have to come to those bigger water sources, and trying to figure out where they're going to go when they can drink anywhere is almost impossible. And so on both of those hunts, within about a day to 2 days, it became very obvious to us that our plan of ambushing an antelope at a waterhole was probably going to be a very low odds proposition. Now you're faced with the prospect of having to spot and stalk antelope a month before the rut, when they're on high alert, they can see you like 10x binoculars, and all you have to work with is knee-high grass and prickly pear cactus. You try sneaking up on a herd of antelope in knee-high grass from a half a mile or a mile away, and I'm going to tell you that is not an easy task. And like I said, we were completely unsuccessful in South Dakota a couple years ago, and this past year we got lucky, and you know, that article, I've told you that story. We got lucky for a couple different reasons. One is we ran into a rancher and got some permission to get onto some private land, and two, we actually managed to decoy my buck in, which is no guarantee at that time of the year, because they're as liable to ignore it or head the other way as they are to come in. It's not anything like the rut where they're going to charge in on those decoys. So we had some things break our way last year, but if we were just relying on water holes, it was going to be a bad deal.
Yeah. No, water holes are no better than a 50-50 deal, even under ideal conditions, because I've been in the most classical water hole places in Wyoming you could ever hunt, dry and arid, and have a year to where it's thunderstorming in the evening and, you know, raining and doing things, and it's a 100% shutdown at that point. You're wasting your time. And you better have plan B ready. You better have a decoy. You better maybe have a cow decoy, even something to, you know, hide behind and sneak, or be willing to be, you know, savvy, because antelope, a lot of people don't consider the fact that they're pretty habitual before the rut. They live in a kind of a square acreage, you know, it's big, but they'll live in a certain area and pretty well stay there, and they kind of do the same tours each day. They make the same junkets, they walk them. And if you know, I got one last year just by hunting a trail. Nothing, I mean, it was just like whitetail hunting. I found a trail that, you know, they were walking it, and there was no water to be had as far as hunting water sources. There was no rut going on, and it took a long time, but I hid behind a boulder and, you know, got one killed off of a trail, you know. But there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and you better be ready to adapt if you come on that early water hole hunt, because that probably out of 10 trips out west to hunt water, 5 of them ain't gonna work.
Yeah, and so I actually have vowed, Eddie, I will never do that hunt again in August unless it's a drought year. It's got to be a drought. I mean, not just dry. I want it bone dry, parched. I want it like the Serengeti plain, where every animal within 10 miles has to come to that pond because it's the only water, and they know that it's dangerous there, but their choice is to either come drink there or die. You know what I mean? And that's, man, then I want to hunt the water. And I've had, you know, years ago in Wyoming, I had really good water hole hunts. You know, I had a couple of them where, like, to your point, yeah, you get on a good water hole and you have groups of antelope, you know, that will come throughout the day. So it can really run the gamut, you know, from really good to really bad to anywhere in between. So you can't, to your point, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. I can remember years ago, you wrote an article, and I think it'd be fun to have you share this story. You wrote an article about a pronghorn hunt where you weren't having any luck, and I think you drove to like a Walmart somewhere and you bought some stuff and you built like a cutout silhouette of a cow, and you snuck up on some antelope and shot one from behind this homemade cow decoy. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that was. I had actually gave up on that hunt after a week and left, and was I was done. But it was eating on me, and I got Peg interested and let me try one more time. And we went to a Lowe's and bought a 4x8 sheet of the 2-inch, foam, and went to Walmart and bought the fur and made the cow decoy, and went back and got our little black leggings on, and I let her carry the decoy with me behind it, and very first one of them we tried, I got within 40 yards of them, and I didn't get a shot. I ended up spooking them. I tried to get too close. I was greedy. I was like, I didn't know how close you could get to them with a cow decoy. I mean, I thought, my God, if he's going to let me get 40 yards, I'll get 30. You know, and he didn't go for that. But when he moved off, we left him alone for a while and come back, and the next time was a little bit longer proposition. I actually shot him at about 60 yards. But yeah, it worked. You know, just by not giving up and figuring out a way. It was not your classical antelope habitat either. It was the flat grasslands, no sage, thunderstorm country, water all the time. So nothing normal would work there. So the cow decoy was something that managed to get me out of there with a good buck. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift gears now and talk a little bit more about rut hunting, because you wanted to dive into that earlier, because I could just tell, that's what lights Eddie Claypool's fire when it comes to these pronghorn hunts. And, I'll just lead with this. So last year, after I had done my pronghorn hunt in August, I went home, and then I came back in late September for an elk hunt in that same area. So I wasn't hunting, the same exact spots in that area, but it was the same general, part of the country. And so I drove through several times during the course of my elk hunt, some of those prairie areas, and it was amazing to see the difference in the behavior of the antelope mid-August, when they were really just kind of standing around, walking around sort of aimlessly, if you will, just doing nothing. And then to see in late September, we'd be driving down the road, and there in a pasture right alongside the road would be like two antelope bucks just hauling butt across country, one chasing another and just going after each other here and there. And I mean, it was like pandemonium. And I thought, man, if I would have just done my antelope hunt now, you could probably belly crawl out into any one of these pastures where there's a little rise, keep yourself hidden, get up to the top of one of those little hills and pop that decoy up. You could probably get any number of these bucks to just run right up to you and shoot them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It can be that good. My biggest problem is, and it's most everybody's problem that likes to hunt coarse mule deer and elk, is that you just won't be doing it then, because you're right in the middle of mule deer and elk season. You want to be in the mountains and everything else. But yeah, if I had my choices, I'd hunt them then for numerous reasons. Not only are they more killable, and it's a lot more exciting and fun. Setting water really stinks. It really does.
It's a boring day, dawn to dark inside of a ground blind. It's hot and boring. And if you don't have if you don't have any cell service, it's really boring.
But yeah, it's a boring hunt. I just do it early because it's there's nothing else to do. But yeah, I would come if I had my ruthers, and I'm going to start doing this more in my future, because as I get older, I'm leaning toward the easier hunts. I'm not going to be busting my guts as much as I used to on the elk and stuff, and I'm going to start hunting pronghorn in the rut a little bit more, because a lot less people. You got the whole place to yourself. The antelope are active. You can be active, and a decoy can do wonders. And I want to try my cow decoy then too, because if it'll work when they're standing there alert with nothing on their mind, I'm sure it will really work during the rut.
Yep. So now I've used the Montana decoys, effectively. You've talked about a cow decoy. Montana decoy actually makes a cow decoy, and I have one of those. So I actually have a buck decoy, a cow decoy, and a doe decoy. And then I've got one of those decoys that goes right on your bow too. That you can strap to your bow, and it's got a hole. I don't remember. I think that's it's not the Heads Up decoy, which is a different company. It was somebody else. But anyway, I've got one of those. What kind of decoys do you use, and how do you use them?
I mainly use the Montana decoys. They're just so handy, You can fold them up or whatever. But yeah, one thing I want to try during the rut is I would like to, take the cow decoy to make my cover, use it for me to access out into the wide open, and then go out, like you said, to a high point and prop up a doe and a buck decoy, like a buck standing over a doe, and then just get back about 30 yards and hide behind the cow decoy, for my shooting cover. I think that could be deadly, because, a lot of times if you're decoying with a buck decoy on your own, you're hiding right behind it. It's got its eyes right on that, and then there you are. A lot of times they'll stand there and let you actually draw your bow, but sometimes they don't. I think if I was off to the side behind the cow decoy, I could probably get just about any of them that come to my antelope decoys. I could probably get them shot, So that's a new plan that I've been thinking about right there. It could be a big, flop, but I picture it working well, because I know a lot of guys. Well, did you shoot yours from behind a buck decoy, or did somebody decoy it for you?
Mine? Oh, you're asking me about my hunt from last year?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, that was a crazy situation because I was with my buddy Tim. Well,
Right.
you know Tim. You just talked
Yeah.
to Tim, didn't you?
Right,
Yeah. So
right.
Tim and I were out there, and we saw this buck in this alfalfa field, and there was a little like mound there that we could get behind. And so I was like, well, let's get the decoy and get over here behind this mound. And we looked, and there was some of them big hay bales out in the field. And I said,
Right.
why don't you crawl up, belly crawl up behind that hay bale up there, and then what I'll do, and then the buck was out beyond that, and I said, I'll pop the decoy up, and I'll move out from behind this mound so that he can see me. And if he comes to the decoy, he's going to walk right past you at some point on his way, and that ought to give you a broadside shot, right? In other words, he's behind a hay bale, the buck's over here, he's got to walk to me, so he's going to walk past him, and Tim's going to get like a 40-yard broadside shot. So I pop the decoy up, and that buck is so content feeding on the alfalfa that he doesn't even notice it, you know? So I wait a little while, and he's just not paying any attention at all. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to get a little bit more aggressive here. And so I pick pull the stakes out of the ground, and I'm holding the Montana decoy, and I start just kind of wiggling it side to side to do some motion. Finally, he looks up, and he sees the decoy, and man, he just locks right on it, and you can tell right away he's curious, you know, because he's the only. That's the other thing too, when you're decoying, especially I think early in the season. During the rut, I don't think you're going to find a lot of bucks all by themselves unless they're satellite bucks. You know, the herd, the boss bucks are all going to have harems of does
Right.
with them. But this buck was all by himself, and he was a pretty big buck. And so to see this young buck, he was probably really curious. Who's this young buck, you know, that's moved into the area? And he started coming, and I was like, man, this is going to work perfect because he's going to come to me. And he got to the point where he was to the side of Tim, and I was expecting Tim to get up on his knees and draw his bow, and I was expecting him to launch an arrow. And this buck walked right past Tim, and Tim never even got his bow up, and I didn't know what was going on. So finally, here I was never thinking about shooting this antelope, and now the antelope is past Tim, and the antelope is now between where Tim is and where I am. And I realized, like, all of a sudden, you know, just something clicked in my brain, like, buddy, you better, like, start thinking about shooting this antelope because Tim missed his chance, you know? So I'm like, my bow is laying on the ground off to the right of the decoy, and I don't have an arrow nocked or nothing. My release is in my pocket, you know? So I jam that Montana decoy into the ground, and I quick lean out, I grab my bow, pull an arrow out of the quiver, you know, knock an arrow, get my release, and I'm like, well, I got to get a range on this thing. So I pop my head up over the back of the decoy and, you know, hit the rangefinder on this thing, and he's like 55 yards away, and I was shooting a single pin sight on this hunt. So then I had to come back down the decoy and adjust my pin for 55 yards, and then I like had to turn around and get up on my knees, and just as I draw my bow, the antelope turns and faces directly towards me, and now he's staring at me. He's thinking, what is going on? You know, something weird about this decoy, you know, and he's kind of checking it out. Now I'm at full draw, and I'm like, I don't have a shot because he's facing directly towards me, and I just waited, and a couple seconds went by, and he turned back broadside the other way. So he had come up this way, turned to face towards me, and now he's turned back the other way, and starts to walk away. And he just took a couple steps and stopped again to look back again, and then that gave me the shot that I needed, and I made a good shot. But yeah, that was weird because that whole setup, I was trying to get a shot for Tim, and I ended up, you know, shooting that antelope. But he definitely came in cautiously. It wasn't like during the rut where they say that they'll charge right in on you. You know, I've never experienced that rut hunt before.
Yeah, they can be pretty impressive in mid-September. It's worth going. I would say that, you know, maybe as a beginner starter, go in the rut because you're probably not going to be worrying about the deer and the elk thing anyway. It's going to be your first trip. You're going to be focused on pronghorns. Go then, take a decoy, and you might get really, really hooked on what you're doing because it can be exciting. And it'll give you all kinds of opportunity to cover lots of ground, look at lots of country, look at lots of animals, and do a lot of ciphering on how to figure out how to get this job done. So antelope, waterhole, the classic. I take advantage of that myself some because it's when there's nothing else to hunt. But I don't really per se enjoy it. You're sitting in that blind burning up all day, it's just not a good thing. But just because I write about that a lot, I also feel guilty about shooting them over water too. Sometimes it's kind of almost like baiting bears. I mean, if you get a bear in, which the whole thing with baiting bears is getting them in to the bait, and getting them shot. But antelope at water isn't the most exciting hunt. It's just if they come in there, you're going to kill them. And the rut and the decoy, you're not guaranteed. You may have to decoy 10 antelope to get one shot.
Well, that's the other thing that I wanted to say, actually. I'm glad you said that because it reminded me. If you're hunting mule deer or elk, you might only get one opportunity over the course of a week's hunt. Sometimes you don't get that, right? I mean, it's not uncommon to not fill your tag. Right. Whereas with antelope, and so if you blow a shot on a big elk or a mule deer, man, that's the kind of thing that haunts you. And you might wake up in the night sweats, 3 months later, reliving that. But with antelope are not that way. If you're out there on a rut antelope hunt and you blow a stalk, what do? You go find another group of antelope. And if you blow that stalk, you go find another group of antelope. And if you blow, and you may do 10 or 12 or 20 stalks before you finally get a shot and kill your antelope. And that's okay because there's so much ground. There's so many antelope. It's not near each encounter, at least to me, doesn't carry the stress and the pressure that it would if that was a 350-inch bull. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot more fun. It's a laid-back, easy hunt. Like we said, you can base camp and have family and friends and everybody go their own direction, do their own thing. And you're going to get a lot of opportunity and a lot of exploration in. That's as I've gotten older, that's become way more important to me. I used to just be fanatical about hunting the bull of the woods, the big antlers, the big buck or the big bull or whatever. And I would go through anything to do that. Well, I'm not that crazy about that anymore. I've got a truckload of stuff that's pretty good size. And now it's more about the fun and the enjoyment. I'm going into those, the sportsman stage of my hunting life to where it's all about the experience. And, I'm not going to be killing as much big stuff as I used to, but I'm going to have a lot more fun. I really do. I mean, nowadays, an antelope hunt for me, I may go 2 weeks, and I may only hunt antelope 3 days out of 2 weeks. I know,
because you and Peggy and Lulu are going to be too busy picking wildflowers and all that.
Right. Yeah, I've become a flower child, and we go explore the horny toad population and look for arrowheads and, let Lulu swim in the creeks. I mean, it's funny, the evolution of your life as a person and as a bow hunter. You just got to live it, and that's why if you're from back east and you're not going west, like you said, I mean, I get in trouble for inviting a lot of eastern people west, but I'm not really a Westerner either, so they don't necessarily embrace me, but they got to accept me because I live right on the fringe of the range. But they just assume you Yankees stay back there. No, don't get me wrong. But I get in trouble a lot for writing about this stuff and talking about it because they're like, hey, we got too many people out here already. Too many people to them's one every square mile.
Well, I know what you mean. I mean, it's as I told, I just wrote that article about my elk hunt from last year, and I told the outfitter's wife, I said sharing information about your area and the hunts that you guys offer. I said that is one of the real blessings and curses of my job because on the one hand, you want to let your fellow bow hunters know about these opportunities that exist, but on the other hand, selfishly, it's no different than not wanting 5 other people to knock on the farmer's door here where I hunt in Pennsylvania. I don't need 5 more hunters on my local whitetail ground, and I don't need 10,000 more people applying for tags in the elk unit that I like in Montana, so it comes with the territory. I can't have my cake and eat it too. If I want to be the editor of a bow hunting magazine and you want to be the field editor at a bow hunting magazine, sometimes we have to share some information that we can't keep it all for ourselves,
No, and honestly, I've learned that over my lifetime I've been so secretive. I mean, any whitetail guy knows what secretive means, because especially you Eastern guys, you have to work so hard for your resource that you're going to jump through hoops to keep it quiet, But over my life, I've learned that really you can share a lot of information, and people will come sometimes and they'll piddle with it. I call it piddle with it. And then they go away. It's only the one in about 100 that really gets stuck to it and takes to it like a duck to water and causes you problems. And so at the end of the day, it's not a big deal. I just tell people what I do. I don't pinpoint my spots. I mean, anybody knows that you don't pinpoint your spots, but you give the information out and let people do what they will with it. And hopefully, maybe one of these days when I'm gone or retired from this public scene, there will be people out there that will still be enjoying some of the stuff that they remember reading, some of my stories. They will want to have done them and tried them, and maybe they got their family a good vacation out of the deal every year,
One thing that we didn't talk about, and I know we need to wrap it up soon, but I think we need to touch on this briefly, is equipment, and specifically your bow setup and all that. And so I'm gonna start it out by saying that any bow that you have set up for whitetails is going to be sufficient for your antelope hunt, probably even your same arrows. If you want to consider maybe making a dozen lighter arrows for the trip, you can do that. But if you really can't swing it, or you just feel like you want to stick with your whitetail arrows, it shouldn't be a problem. I would say for pronghorns, I'm generally going to recommend that you shoot a mechanical broadhead and a real wide cutting diameter. Antelope are not thick-skinned, and they're not heavy boned. They're even compared to a whitetail, they're more frailly built. They're a slender animal. They're not as big as a whitetail. They're built for speed, not for brawn, and if you hit an antelope anywhere really in the body cavity, even, you hate to say this because nobody wants to make a bad shot, but because they live in really wide open country, it's not like a whitetail. When you get a gut shot on a whitetail, that animal's going to die, but it might be able to run so far into thick cover and hide itself that you can never find that animal. But with a pronghorn, even if you don't make a perfect shot, your odds of recovering that animal are pretty good, because chances are, even if it runs a mile before it lays down, you're going to be able to relocate that animal and watch it. Or if you have to stalk in and get a second shot, which brings me to shot distance. If you're hunting out of a water hole, you're liable to get a 40-yard and in shot, if you set up properly. But I still think you should be definitely capable of making a 60-yard or even 70-yard shot, because, one, that might be the only shot you get, and two, even if you make a closer shot, if you hit an antelope well, it's going to go down really quickly. But there may be instances where you need that follow-up shot, and you need to be prepared to reach out a little further in that wide open country to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because even if you shoot one close, but it's not a good hit, you definitely need to be able to, if it's wounded, you need to be able to reach out there and get another arrow in it and get it on the ground. One of the things with antelope, you don't want to push them if you don't hit them well. Let them go out there. You can see them, like you said, a half mile, and let them lay down and watch them, and let them expire if you can, because if you do ever get one up and get to pushing it and get the adrenaline flowing, they can go a mile in a matter of no time and get out of your sight. And then a lot of times if they fall over dead, especially if you have to leave one laying overnight, you know what the prairie's like. It's full of coyotes, and they'll eat them up, But as far as the gear goes, I just tell everybody to just take their whitetail gear, it's plenty good. You don't need any extra poundage on your draw length. You don't, if you want to be a speed freak and shoot faster, that's fine, because antelope do antelope do have a tendency to want to jump the string on you sometimes. And so the faster you're shooting, maybe the better. I don't worry about it. The main thing to me is have a good rangefinder. That's the main thing. Have a good rangefinder, because whether you're shooting slow or fast, if you know the yardage, you can plop the arrow right in on the bullseye, whether it's slow or fast. But if you don't know the yardage, even shooting fast, you can miss. You can miss fast. But yeah, no, I wouldn't change my gear. Just be ready to shoot out to 60 or 70 yards, and just bring your standard broadheads, your standard arrows. I use a little fixed blade head. The mechanicals fly perfect. If that's what you're into, I don't have a problem. And once they get it deployed, of course, they cut a lot broader hole. So
yeah, one thing you mentioned. Yeah, you mentioned a rangefinder too. I would say all optics overall. You're going to need a really good set of binoculars. I would say 10x, even 12x for that kind of country. And a spotting scope's not a bad idea either, because you're going to be definitely looking at some things from a long distance.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of observation. You may want to set back a half, 3/4 of a mile and watch a plane and figure out what's going on with your binos. But the spot and scope thing's personal. If you're wanting to judge horn size, get one, take it. But binoculars are mandatory. The scope is optional.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, we could probably go on and on and on, but we're a little over an hour, Eddie, and that's a lot of good information there. A lot of good information. If you're going antelope hunting, hopefully you can get something out of this that will help you for this year. And if you've not been antelope hunting in the past, you've got about a year to plan your adventure, and I tell you what, like you talked about, I just love that part of the world. I don't know if I could live there, Eddie. I don't know if I could live in that kind of isolation, like year round, but for a week a year to go visit that part of the world and just really enjoy a completely different habitat, something that looks so different from home. There's animals there that are nothing like we have here, and then to be able to actually hunt as well, it's just a tremendous experience.
Yeah, even if you make it a vacation, if you're just a weekend warrior and you want to go on a week-long vacation and not really prioritize killing something with a bow, it's a great hunt that you could say you did, and take the family and camp out, roast wieners at night. And the main thing is, after a week of it and you come back into civilization, you will realize what you've just done. It will imprint on you that peace and quiet, and that ability to just meditate and think and listen to the wind blow and think a lot about life. That's what we need. When we fight the rat race year round, we need some breaks from it. So take the family and go on a good do-it-yourself pronghorn hunt. You don't have to go look for a big one. Just go for fun, and it will be fun if you make it that way.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Eddie, it's always good to catch up with you. I wish you and Peg and Lulu a happy 4th of July, and hopefully, with any luck, the second half of 2020 is a heck of a lot better than the first half.
Thank you for listening to Petersen's Bowhunting Radio, the official podcast of hardcore bow hunters. Pick up the latest issue of Petersen's Bowhunting on your local newsstand, or check us out on the web at bowhuntingmag.com.